Masking in InDesign is just as important as in Photoshop and Illustrator. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through all the different ways you can show and hide parts of your images. I will demonstrate the use of custom frames, feathering, and clipping paths, and show you many creative techniques that can improve your InDesign layouts. Check out the other 2 videos in this series if you want to learn more about masking. You can find the links in the description below. As always, if you like the way I explain things and you want to learn more from me, make sure to check out our training platform, where you can access over 200 hours of premium courses on tools like InDesign. Use the link in the description below to start your membership now with a 3-day free trial. When someone mentions masking, InDesign is not the tool that you would first think of. It's more Photoshop and then Illustrator, but actually in InDesign there's also quite a lot of masking techniques you can do, even just simply by working with frames, which is the most common thing you would do in InDesign, is in a way a masking technique. So let me walk you through all of these things that you can do to show and hide details and to work with these techniques in a creative way in Adobe InDesign. First of all, when you work with frames, you need to remember that the frame is your container and the image inside it is the content. And they work together, but also independently in a way. So you can see here on the right side, I have my frame and inside it the image. And I can drag any of the sides in to crop the image. So let's say if I want to crop it closer to the flower, it will look like that. And then using the content grabber in the middle, I can drag the image around within this crop if I wanted to move it around. So you can see why I'm referring to the frame itself as a mask, because it is showing and hiding certain parts of the image. Now, of course, you can use different shapes in InDesign to create your frames. Even if you have a frame that's already rectangular, like this one here, you can use the frame tools like the ellipse frame tool and draw a circle. If you hold down the Shift key, it will be a perfect circle, or an ellipse if you want. And once you have that ready, you can just select the image itself, Command or Control X to cut it out, and then selecting your frame, you just have to use Command Option V or Control Alt V to paste into that shape. So this is still the same principle. Here we have again the content grabber tool. We can move the image around within that frame and even resize if we wanted to. So nothing really different apart from the shape, of course, of the frame. And of course you have also the polygon frame tool, which works exactly the same way. Now, if you click with that tool, what's worth mentioning is that you can type in the amount of sides and you can even create star inset. So basically, instead of a normal polygon, you can have a star. So for example, a 5 side star, if I just type in 50%, we will get a perfect star shape, which again will act as our frame. To be honest, I very rarely or even never used a star-shaped frame in InDesign, but it's still worth mentioning, and maybe in one of your projects you will find this useful. But let me show you a cool technique. If you use the frame tool, so the normal rectangle frame tool, you can do another technique with this as well. And just so you can see what I'm doing here, I am going to create a separate layer and start drawing my frame. So you can see if I press right arrow on the keyboard, I can separate my frame, or it's called gridify, meaning creating a grid of frames. I can use the up arrow also to divide it into rows. Let's just create maybe something around that much at 7 by 4 frames at this point, and I'm just going to let go here. So what happened here is that we have a lot of separate frames, or a grid of frames, and what we can do is to cut the image out from the background, just like before. I select it and then press Command X or Control X. Now I can select all of these other frames, and from the object menu I'm going to choose Paths, Make Compound Path. It's Command or Control 8 the shortcut for it. This is actually the same shortcut in Illustrator as well, so it's worth learning it for both applications. And what you will see is that once you created that, all of these rectangles are now joined. So even though they are still independent rectangles, which I can select with the direct selection tool and I can move around, it's still going to be handled as one compound path. And the cool thing about that is if I select all of them together, so just click on it now because it's one entity, I can use the shortcut Command Option V or Control Alt V, which is the paste into feature, and you'll see that the image will be now placed into this grid of frames. So that is a really cool option. And by the way, the paste into feature is from the edit menu. You can find it there as well. And as I said before, if I select one of these squares, I can move it around, even delete one of them. If I want to have an empty space for text, in this case, it would look really cool in a brochure. So you can experiment with this feature and see what you can come up with. But let me show you with the same image another version. If I use the rectangle tool or rectangle frame tool and I just draw maybe a frame here, I'm going to draw another frame around here and then maybe another frame there. It could even be more like portrait frame. And then maybe let's just have these overlapping as well, something like that. And I'm just going to rotate them slightly as well. Why not? Just add a bit more interest on it like that. Also, let's rotate this that way. Now I'm going to select all of these 3 frames. So currently they are just empty frames. And I created an object style in this document, which I'm going to apply to them. It's a simple white stroke with a bit of drop shadow on them. So that's how they look. And even like this, it looks interesting. But what we've done previously is to cut the image out, select one of these frames and use the shortcut paste into, and then repeat it for these other images or other frames. And now we have again a very creative version of the same original composition. So in a way, I use these frames to highlight the most interesting details of the image. And that is still just playing with the rectangular frame tool. We haven't even used any more advanced techniques. But let's crack on and look at another really cool technique that you can do. And once again, a lot of people wouldn't even think of using tools like the pen tool or the pencil and the smooth tools in InDesign, but they are actually there and they work almost exactly the same way as in Illustrator. I think InDesign inherited these tools from Illustrator because InDesign is actually the youngest one out of the 3 main graphic design tools, so Photoshop, Illustrator and InDesign. This is the one that learned quite a lot from the other 2 applications, but mainly from Illustrator. So let's just say I would like to create a cutout effect. I could use the pen tool, of course, for that. And I'm just going to draw around this lady. Let's just create an interesting frame here. So it's like a fashion cutout when you use scissors and you just cut out an image from its background. That's basically the effect. Like that, and that is already a frame. So I can now select the image and paste into here with the same shortcut. Similarly to before, we could also add our object style on it, and then we have a cool cutout effect. Now, similarly to this, if I just copy the image and paste it in again, let's just put it here on the side, the one that we created with the pen tool. So I'm just going to keep that there. But on this other one, I'm going to use now instead the pencil tool. And with this one, I can draw around it. Again, I'm not trying to create a perfect selection, but this is going to be a little bit more organic, less sharp and edgy selection. And here at the bottom, let's just close it off, something like that. I'm going to try to close it. But to be honest, the easiest way to close it would be to go to the object menu, paths, and then close path. And that closed the endpoint for it. Now, once again, we could paste it in here, cut the image, paste it in, and then use again the same frame style on it. So the pencil tool is more rounded compared to the pen tool. But if you wanted to refine edges on either of these versions, you can also use the smooth tool, with which you can draw over the edges that you created and just smooth them out basically. So have a smoother transition on these sharp corners. So just like in Illustrator, you can use this tool. And if you double click on the smooth tool in the toolbar, you get additional options like fidelity and smoothness. But let's move on to the next feature, which is using typography as your frame, or turn text into the frame itself. Now this is very similar to using clipping masks in Photoshop, but in InDesign you actually need to outline your text, so you won't be able to keep it editable if you want to have an image inside a word or a sentence or a single character. Here I have this text still editable, and I kerned it slightly to have the E and the A joined up together. You will see why, because I actually have an interesting detail there in the photo behind it. But first of all, as I said, we need to outline this. The shortcut for that is Command-Shift-O or Control-Shift-O, but you can also go to the type menu and choose Create Outlines. So once you've done that, your text is now made up of paths. So each character is turned into an individual path, but it is actually held together as a compound path. So if I go to the object menu and under the path options, you can see it would say release compound path. You can actually separate them into individual shapes, but by default, when you use the outline option, it will create a compound path, which means that if I copy this image or cut it out and paste into this selection, it would immediately place it into all of those characters at the same time. So now this word is our custom frame, and again, if I hover over it, I can use the content grabber to move the image around within the text. So you can see why I wanted to keep this part here visible, and it's actually quite cool the way the two letters are joined together, almost forming like a ligature. But let's move on. There's another thing you can do in InDesign, and that is feathering. Now feathering is again something that's available in Photoshop, but here in InDesign you actually have a little bit more options with it. First of all, a tool that I really like is called Gradient Feather Tool. It's something you can use when you select an image, and let's say you just want to fade out one part of it or one side of it. You can click and drag, and it's going to fade out the other side of the image. So if you want to keep, let's say, the right side visible, you just have to do it from that side. If you do it in a shorter line, then the transition itself will be shorter. You can do it diagonally, and you can also do it vertically if you want, and so on and so forth. So this is called Gradient Feather, and with the tool, it's very quick and easy to set up. But there's other two feathering options as well, which you can find from the FX drop down. So if you go here, you can see Gradient Feather is already on. And if you want it to be a bit more specific, you can also change it here. So for example, even instead of linear, you can use radial gradients, and you can reverse it as well. But let's just see what else we have here. We have directional feather. It's important that you have to make sure you click on the word as well. So whichever effect you are using, make sure you click on it, not just the tick, otherwise you won't see the options on the right. So once this is selected and the preview option is on at the bottom, you will be able to see how this works. Basically, the directional feather is a similar feature to gradient feather, but in this case, you can control which side of your frame should be feathered out. And you can control them independently of each other, or if you click on the little chain here, it will apply the same amount of feathering on all sides. And last but not least, we also have basic feather, which is just a global feathering around all the edges. So this is probably the most straightforward one from all of them. Now you can of course still play around with these other values like noise, which can be interesting, or you can also use the choke, defining again the transition, the length of the transition in a way. And of course, you can also combine multiple feathering if you ever want to do that. And these effects I would mainly use to ghost out images and to have them push back in the background to be able to put some text over it or stuff like that. Of course, you can combine it with reduced opacity as well. So you can soften at the edges, and then you can soften the image itself as well. And that makes it much easier to use it as a background element if you ever need that, maybe on a brochure. But now that you know how to use feathering, let's move on to something more exciting, and it's called detect edges. Now I have an image here and I'm just going to move it over the text so you can see that it has a white background. It's an isolated photograph, so obviously it's been prepared like this, but it's a simple JPEG file, so there's no selections or masks prepared for it. But what I'm going to do is to go to the object menu and choose clipping path. From there, choose options. And if I switch to detect edges, you will see what it can do. It automatically creates a selection for us. Again, it tries to identify the high contrast details, and based on that, it's going to create the selection using a path. Now, there's a couple of additional options here. You can increase the threshold or decrease the threshold. In this case, decreased threshold is probably better because you can see there were a few details that were lost if I had a higher threshold. Because it's a completely white background, I could go down really low with the threshold, and I could further refine it if I wanted to by clicking OK and just use the direct selection tool to move any of these points around. So if I come a little bit closer, I can select, let's say, one of these points here and either delete them or move them around. So I can move them up, and then let's just grab this point here, drag it down. So similarly, how you would work with a vector mask in Photoshop, you can do exactly the same thing here within InDesign. I wouldn't recommend to spend too much time on paths in InDesign because Photoshop can actually do probably a better job, but still, when we move this over here, you can see it's actually quite nice. Now, the only problem is that I still feel like there's a bit of the original white details showing up around the edges. So for this, if we go back to the clipping path options, we can increase this feature called inset frame. When I increase that up and click OK, click away, you can see the white gaps are gone now. There's still a couple of things that we would need to refine, but it's better to do these type of things in Photoshop, although InDesign can do it for you. If you want to do it quickly without leaving InDesign, it's perfectly fine, but you can do this better if you use vector and pixel masks in Photoshop. But detect edges feature is actually something you can use also for text wrap. So not only for cutting out an image from its original background, but also for text wrap. Now that's still something you apply onto your image. And this feature you can find from the window menu, text wrap panel. And within there, you can choose this third option, which is the wrap around object shape. And within here, you will find the detect edges option. But in case you already use detect edges for your clipping, you can just leave it as same as clipping. So you wouldn't have to choose detect edges again. It's just worth mentioning that it is the same feature that can be applied either for a selection or for text wrap. So if I have this option on here and maybe just increase the offset, you will see exactly what it does. It creates an outline based on that path on this image, and it makes sure that when you move this image closer to text, the text will be pushed away. So the outline will make sure that the text wraps around the image. So if you already use detect edges to create a clipping path in InDesign for an image, you should also make use of it for a bit of text wrap. But of course, don't overdo it because these effects can make it difficult to read your copy. So just a useful point here, if you do this feature, it's best to use it with justified text, because if it's not justified, so let's just say I left align it, then both left and right side is going to be really messy. While when I go back to justified text, at least the right side is completely straight. And finally, here's a few examples where we can combine the features of Photoshop and InDesign. So first of all, on the left side, I have an image which has a pixel mask saved in it. It's actually saved as a channel. So if I Alt or Option double click on this image, it will open up in Photoshop and I can show you exactly what I created here. There is an alpha channel saved. So it was a selection that I saved as an alpha channel. So it can also be something that you save as a pixel mask, but in this case, it's saved here into the channels. And if I come here into InDesign and go to the Object Clipping Path options, this is something I will be able to utilize by choosing Alpha Channel. As simple as that. And then, of course, I have to make sure I choose also the channel, which I called girl. So I click on that and then click OK. So we have a really nice selection created from the alpha channel. Or if you have an image which was saved with a path, InDesign will also be able to use that. So I go through again, clipping path options, and then choose Photoshop path this time. And there's the camera, which it found automatically. That was the only path saved. And I can click OK, and we can see it looks great. This was actually a path that we created in the Photoshop masking tutorial. If you haven't seen it already, make sure you check it out. It really covers a lot. The link is in the description below. So both of these examples here, you can see in the tutorial, I go through step by step how I created them. So my preference when I work with images in InDesign and I want to cut them out is to save a path into them. So similarly to a vector mask, these are actually saved as a path. So again, I can show you how this looks. There's no layer mask or anything like that, but the same thing that we've done in that other video, that path or outline is saved as a path, and I just simply call it camera. So if you use the pen tool and you draw your path, you just have to make sure you double click on the name and name it and save it like that. The cool thing is that you can even store paths in JPEG files. So you don't even have to have a PSD file. You can have a smaller file sized image, but it still can hold paths. Even multiple paths, if you need, you can store in one single JPEG. But here's one last example where I wanted to create something a bit more complicated, and I created both a vector mask and a pixel mask in Photoshop. So I can just show you how this looks. Again, if I option double click here, we will see that for this image, if I turn off the photo layer, I needed the pixel mask for the hair and the vector mask for the body. So again, hard edges and soft edges. Again, if you're not familiar with these techniques, check out my Photoshop masking video, which is part of this mini series. So that's how I created it in one layer, having those two masks creating the cutout. And then I have also the original full image underneath. So you will see why I created this way. And I even named my layers. So the one at the bottom is called photo and the one on the top is called mask. So as simple as that. But if we come back here into InDesign, the reason why I've done it this way is because I can select one of them, right click and choose Object Layer Options, or you can also find this from the Object menu if you want. And within that, you can choose which layers you want to show. So if I turn off the photo layer, then obviously we will see the masked out version. I can then click OK. And now I can align these two images to each other. So I can drag this over to the other one. And let's just put both of them here in the middle. Now, why did I do this? What was the point of creating the mask if I then put them on top of each other? Well, what I can do now is to select the full image version. And if I drag the top edge down, maybe to somewhere around here, then we can create these cool out of bounds effects. And of course, we can decide how much of the original image we want to see. We can even click on the little yellow square on the right and drag these points in to create more like a rounded shape, or even use a round shape there instead of the rectangle. So just to combine a little bit the techniques that we had, I'm going to undo these changes and use the ellipse frame tool and draw an ellipse. Let's just say something like that. And then I just cut this out, select that circular or elliptical frame and paste into. So there you go. We have a very nice out of bounds effect. And that is all I wanted to show you in this video. So all the different ways of showing and hiding details of images in InDesign. But this is a really powerful tool. And if you want to learn more about all the other features in it, I highly recommend to check out our InDesign CC Masterclass course, which literally covers everything you need to know to be able to work with this tool like a professional. Let us know in the comment section what would you like us to cover next time on this series. Click on the link in the description or the join button to become a member if you want to work on future projects with us and see the whole design or illustration process live. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and share this video if you enjoyed it. Have fun learning, guys, and I will see you in the next one.